Welcome to Take 5, your 5-minute inspirational message from Solid Rock Drogheda. My name's Nick Park and I'm taking us through a series called The Biblical Game of Thrones, looking at the kings of Israel and Judah and seeing how God overruled all of the plotting and scheming of men. Now, yesterday we looked at Hezekiah, the king of Judah, the greatest king Judah had known since back when the two kingdoms were united under David and Solomon. And tomorrow we'll be looking at Hezekiah's son, Manasseh, who was actually the worst king that the nation of Judah had ever known. But today we're just going to pause to think about one of those what-ifs in history, because there's a thing called counterfactual history, which is basically where historians try to imagine, well, what if this person had made a different decision? What if this country had lost this war instead of winning it, and so on. And one of the biggest what-ifs in the Bible is about Hezekiah. As we heard yesterday, Hezekiah was a good king, and he was told that he was going to die, and he prayed, and God extended his life miraculously by 15 years. Now, during those 15 years, he fathered a son, because before then, he had no children. And in the last 15 years of his life, he fathered a child, Manasseh. And Manasseh was going to be the wickedest king of all, the king whose wickedness would actually finally tip the scales of God's judgment to make the carrying away into captivity and the destruction of Jerusalem unavoidable. And I've heard preachers say things like, oh, if only Hezekiah hadn't prayed that prayer, you need to be careful what you pray for. He would have been better off if he had died at that 15 years earlier and hadn't given birth to Manasseh. Well, it's very easy to say something like that. The problem is, of course, why was God preserving the kings on the throne of Judah? It was that the seed of Abraham, the seed of David, could be passed down the line until we finally reached Jesus Christ. And if Hezekiah had died without having a son, then it would be very difficult to see how we could trace that kingship all the way down to Jesus. Because Hezekiah, his brothers, he had two brothers, and they were both killed. One of them, their father actually offered him as a human sacrifice. And so Hezekiah was left as the only child. And so if he didn't have any children, it was going to be very difficult, given some of the things that had happened over the history and how many members of royal families had been killed. It would have been very difficult indeed to trace that descent down to Jesus. In fact, God told him that he had to set his house in order. A lot of Bible scholars believe that means that he should father a son and make sure of an heir. Now, the message came to him from Isaiah. And in fact, there is a Jewish tradition that says that that Hezekiah's wife, which was Hephzibah, that she was Isaiah's daughter. And so that Isaiah was actually Hezekiah's father-in-law. And so if he had died 15 years earlier, Manasseh wouldn't have been born. But then how would the promised line have gone all the way down to Jesus? You see, there's a couple of principles that we need to get focused in on here and get settled in our hearts. One of them is this: we can't second guess what might have been. Yes, there's times when we can be grateful that we made the right decision or that a miracle happened. And there's times we can be sorrowful that something didn't go the way we planned. But we can't deal with what if. We can only deal with what is. And the biblical record tells us that not because of the what if of might have happened, but because of the what is that Hezekiah did give birth, or his wife did give birth to Manasseh, that therefore Jesus came to us. So we can't second guess what might have been. We can only deal with what is, not what if. Stop obsessing and worrying over the what ifs in your life and praise God for what is. The other takeaway that we can take from this is that God's ultimate purpose in the Old Testament was the coming of Jesus. Yes, it made a big difference whether there was a good king or a bad king on the throne, but ultimately, all of this was not about just Israel being happy or Israel's kingdom lasting a few years longer or a few years shorter. This was about Jesus coming, the perfect plan of Jesus coming for the salvation of the world. And we need to be very careful when we read the Old Testament that we never take our eyes off that ultimate fact that despite all of the stuff was going on, the what ifs of what Hezekiah did or might not have done, God was working to a plan. And that plan was going to bring Jesus to the world. And today I'm thankful for the plan of God. And I'm thankful that I don't have to worry about the what ifs in my life, but I can praise God for what is, and I can serve him in the what is, rather than worrying about the what if. May God bless you today. Join us again tomorrow for another Take 5, your 5-minute inspirational message from Solid Rock Drogheda.